All right, Steeler fans, it's Monday morning conversation time, and I've been trying to get this guy on my podcast for like literally months now. He's got a big family. I've got a big family. I understand what it's like, but Chris Adamski joins me. What's up, Chris? How are you?
Not too bad. It's never an off season in the NFL anymore, so I'd say it's a downtime, but it's really not. It never is.
It's just one of like the two lulls of this calendar year. Like, you have the combine, which just wrapped up, which is
Yeah.
big, but
Yeah.
free agency hasn't started yet. And then you have that lull in the summertime. But still, in case there's someone out there that's listening or watching this on our YouTube channel, give your history of covering the Steelers for them.
Yeah, I mainly, I guess the easiest way to say is during the fall of 2014. So now we're over 10 years. It's crazy for me to think about. I was covering Penn State for the Tribune Review then, and then they made a change. I kind of filled in the rest of that season. Me and Mark Cavalli at that point, and then it just after the season they made it permanent. And yeah, so it's been that long. Before that, I had done some. Worked for random, I covered a lot of Steelers, but it was more on a part-time basis or, doing other things and stuff. And pretty much since then, it's been 10 years for the Triple Live, as we like to brand it now, the website, newspaper, what that's worth anymore. But
absolutely, I get it. And I've had, some of your colleagues on my podcast before, but let's start off with something I talked a lot about last week, because I think it matters. Maybe you disagree. The NFLPA releases their report card, and I understand that sometimes you can get disgruntled employees. We've all taken those surveys where you kind of get pissed off and you're like, fine, I'm going to screw these people by giving them nasty grades. And I don't know what they do in terms of rejecting someone that just puts all Fs on the scorecard or whatever. You're inside the facility. You've been in the facility, so you see what these players are talking about. What was your takeaway from the NFLPA report card?
Yeah, there's a few things here. First off, it always has been, for the Steelers in particular, striking. Now, there's a lot of things that have happened. Follow me here, but the Steelers share a facility with Pitt, as most people and everybody should know.
Yes.
And now for years, now I know in the last couple of years now, college sports has changed. Now there's NIL. Now they can actually funnel money to the players. But up to that point, the way there was a lot of money being poured into college athletics, but you couldn't give it directly to the players. So the college programs would spend a lot of money to sort of wow the players in recruiting. So it would always kind of struck me as Pitt with this, mid to upper level ACC program next to the Pittsburgh Steelers, arguably the crown jewel of the NFL, and they're in the same building. If you could walk in the right door, it was sort of palatial, very almost gaudy in terms of its, the decorations, the just the way it was set up. In the Steelers side was relatively pretty Spartan, right? It was just, it was more utilitarian, I guess.
Okay.
And in the past few years, the Steelers have, to a point, sort of upgraded the facility, and now in college sports doesn't mean as much. But I think that's part of NFL sort of this reaction to it. Is I think a lot of these players, they come from Alabama or they come from Georgia or whatever it is, and they have. And I haven't been to those facilities, but I just assume at a major SEC program, they come to the Steelers. And Juju Smith-Schuster even made reference to it once, the wooden lockers. He kind of made fun of it. And they are. It struck me again. I saw a video pretty recently here. I think it was Jack Lambert's retirement press conference. And I'm like, that's the same lockers they're using now. The same exact thing from 1983 or whatever it is. And I think that is intentional to a point where they, that's what they do. It's tradition. It's a wooden nameplate, and that's it. But I do see, just being from visiting other stadiums now, and certainly even just, everybody watches, Hard Knocks, and you see what, even the Ravens facility compared to the Steelers and the locker room. It's a very barren, I'm sure there are Whippio high schools. I would imagine North Allegheny might have like a little bit, you know what I'm saying? I'm just throwing it out there. So it is a very sort of basic locker room. That's one part of this.
That's fair. That's fair.
Yes. And another part is that you have the fact that they share this with Pitt. And I do believe that they definitely are exploring their options here. One of them would be to kick Pitt out. I think more likely is Steelers build their own facility, probably in the suburbs, maybe not. Like I did see the Atlanta Falcons facility, for instance. It's in the suburbs. There's all this land. It's like a campus. You can't imagine how big it is. And the Steelers, relatively speaking, is and it's only half. They share it with the Pitt, of course.
Right.
So I do think that they would have expanded it by now, but A, they share it with Pitt, and B, it's just the geography of it. If you're familiar, anybody in the south side of Pittsburgh, you have a river on one side, you have train tracks, you have just, city, urban build up around you. You can't really do much with it. So that's the facilities angle of it.
That's
Yeah,
I was
go on.
curious because the Penguins, are in Cranberry for their training
Yes.
facility. And I was like, is that what the Steelers are going to do? Are they going to have to go outside of city limits? It's going to be interesting to see how this plays out. In your opinion, though, how much stock does the organization put into these grades? Now, I know that from last year to this year, they did offer childcare, which they got ripped to shreds for during games. They got an F grade in after 2023, after 2024, it was a better grade. Do you think they put much stock into what the players think?
I do. I will say this. I think it was a brilliant. The NFLPA, of course, does this. They release it,
Yes.
Right around the same time every year, and it's a way. And how much is this has got a lot of traction, and I get why. And it's become a storyline. And even Art Rooney II referenced the improvements we made. He referenced. I mean, he was asked about it, but he acknowledged that they listened to it. So I do think they see it. I do think it. It probably, hurts might be a strong word, but the Rooney family to get a D, and I think that more has been made of that the way it's been told. I think it's more. It wasn't necessarily, but I think it's the way the question was framed to me was the resources, which goes back to the locker room, things like that.
Yeah.
I don't think they were saying personally he's a D or a D owner or whatever, but it's still that's got to sting to a point. So I do think they take it into consideration. Yes, I do think from the ownership side, the owners and the Rooney family, the Steelers in particular, do listen to that and will react to it and address things. I think. I don't think as much it's an issue. I think for some fans, and I'm not. Every player is different. I don't think there's many players that are going to make a free agent decision off of, wow, this facility is really like,
Yeah.
I'd rather play for the Falcons because they're, you know what I'm saying? Like, I don't think, it's still going to be money talks. It's still going to be the Steelers brand and everything else along with it. Again, 95% of the time is going to be money anyway, but if there is a tie, I don't think that it's going to come down to something like that. But that being said, I do think the ownership will listen to it and react to a point. And they are. And that's what they hate to see. Real quick, they hired David Morehouse, who formerly worked for the Penguins.
It's true.
We're pretty open about facilities. Now that a big part of that's Acrisure Stadium, and that's up for the release is up, and that's probably the bigger part. But I do believe, I think it's more likely than not they either move to the suburbs, or maybe I could see the Rooney family. They have a connection to the city. There still is land even on the north side of Pittsburgh. It's harder because you need 3 fields, 4 fields. But whether it's a city or not, I do think they'll eventually leave that facility for Pitt, the existing one, and build their own somewhere else down the road here at some point. Yes.
A good person to ask about this whenever you get the opportunity again, which won't be for a while, is Patrick Queen, because I live in Maryland and I know where the Baltimore Ravens facility is. It's Under Armour represented. I mean, they spared no expense in their facility. It is immaculate. It is out in the middle of nowhere. It's amazing. And I hate the Ravens, but still, it's amazing. For him. Why did he choose Pittsburgh? Well, A, the Ravens didn't want him. B, they gave him a heck of a lot of money. So that's why he came to Pittsburgh.
Yeah, I do think, the alarm is saying, oh, the Steelers aren't going to get a free agent. This is not college recruiting. I don't think facilities they rank, they way down the list in terms of a player, where they want to go or something. And so I don't think that's really a worry, but I do think it's notable. Yes, I think the Steelers are certainly, I don't any doubt in the bottom, 3rd or 4th in terms of their facilities for sure.
Yeah. All right, well, let's leave the grades behind, and I want to talk to you about the Steelers as a team and as an organization, not from a fundamental NFLPA standpoint, but you're someone I follow on Twitter, and during games, sometimes I like to say you're like the gut punch. You bring up these stats and stuff that just the optimist in me is like, maybe it's not so bad. And then I read your tweets. I'm like, damn, it is really bad. It is really bad. Like, oh, the Steelers in the first quarter of their last so many playoff games have been outscored by whatever the number is. It's like, gosh, this is awful. So I feel like the Steelers are in a rut. I think you might agree with me that they just cannot seem to get themselves out of their current situation. And this dates all the way back to Ben Roethlisberger's retirement in 2021. What do you think would have to happen? And this does stem around the quarterback position, obviously. What do you think is going to have to happen for them to get out of their current run?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, you're right. I mean, the elephant in the room will be the quarterback situation. If you find your guy, and I mean, it's not that simple, of course. But I mean, look at the Houston Texans; they were an absolute, sort of the bottom of the league there for 3 or 4 or 5 years, and then they drafted their guy, and all of a sudden they make the playoffs 2 years in a row, win the division 2 years in a row, and are they're still a step behind the true Super Bowl contenders, but they're right there. That's all. Not all again. But
Right.
getting C.J. Stroud was a major part of it. So that's kind of like the obvious answer, and that's what, but that's the simple, the most simple answer, and the thing that would, because, but I do, it's not a great spot. I hate to. There's a lot of negativity toward the Steelers, I think, and I certainly understand it. They're sort of in this malaise. We're in the same thing. You feel like you're watching Groundhog Day every year. And
Yep.
They eke out a little over 500 and then make the playoffs, and then lose in the first round. Not even competitive in the playoff game. It's the same thing. What are we talking about now? Pretty much 6 years in a row. Since they had a real dominant regular season team even. So I understand the negativity, but so I try to push back on that and try to be objective and say, this isn't as bad. Like, again, they aren't the Texans from 2022 when they were, 3-14 or whatever it was. They're not getting there. But it's also, the other side of it. Then I like to, people say, oh, well, they have this, you have the piece. But I mean, look at the defense. During that 5-game losing streak, the defense was just subjectively bad. It wasn't even like just average or not elite or just good, whatever you want to call it. It was elite defense. The defense was a bigger problem than the quarterback, in my opinion, they're losing those last 5 games of last season. They weren't competitive defensively against the Chiefs, against the Ravens, probably either time. These games got away from them for that reason, more so than, well, Russell Wilson wasn't good enough, or the offense wasn't good enough. They don't have a receiver. Those are all problems too. Don't get me wrong. It's just that it's not that simple to say they get the elite. That's why the talk about maybe Matthew Stafford, I think, was a little bit simplified, or a little bit. Well, I don't think the Steelers were just a top quarterback away from being a Super Bowl contender. So that's a long-winded answer. I know like what I see it as, but yes, I mean, getting the quarterback is still the most important, but there's still a lot of, I mean, I'm sure you might ask me about it. We'll talk about the draft. I mean, defense, you need help in the defensive line. The running back isn't set up. You need at least one wide receiver. They need a cornerback. And that does, all this, I don't even know if they fixed the offensive line. How many resources they poured the offensive line?
Yeah.
And are we 100% convinced that that's,
no,
great? I don't think we are. So,
no. Well, let me ask. Let's before we leave this rut topic, let me ask you: which do you think is more likely, that the Steelers suck and they are like the Texans and get a high draft pick where they can draft a C.J. Stroud, and they should be thanking their lucky stars that the quarterbacks went ahead of him, but still, is that what has to happen? Or do you think that the Steelers are not going to suck, but they're going to have to sell the farm in terms of trading draft capital and potential players to move up and get the quarterback that they desire? What do you think is more likely?
That's a tough question, because I don't, maybe I'm just, buying into it, but I don't see them having this really, 4-13, 3-14 kind of season.
Right.
Now, either with the roster they have, and also just the way, and this is and I understand the criticisms for Mike Tomlin and the organization, but I mean, they just don't do it. They win enough games that they design themselves to pretty much beat the bad teams consistently enough. If you win enough of those games, you're going to keep yourself in playoff contention. So I don't see them having a top 8 or top 10 pick on their own. So then it becomes have they sort of talked themselves into, let's say hypothetically it is Justin Fields they keep, and Justin Fields was good enough to get them to 9 wins again, or even 8 wins. Let's say they finally have a losing season and they end up keeping him, and maybe they don't prioritize moving up in the draft then to get the quarterback. But if I had to pin down, I would probably go with that route, and we never know how these things for sure work out. But next year's draft is supposed to be deeper, and you saw the Bo Nix, what he fell at the 12th overall. Yeah. Last year, maybe that's where did they move up to get Broderick Jones? 14. I mean, that wasn't out of the ordinary. So if you're talking a guy that they can find in that 10 to 12 pick range, and moves up to 10 to take Devin Bush, which we want to relive that. But they've proven they do that. Yeah. So if next year's quarterback class is as deep as you say, as it's said to be by the experts, by the draft people, and the guys there at 10, the same as Devin Bush was there at 10, I think that's much more likely scenario than them sort of the bottom falling out this year at least, or in the next couple of years.
I know there's a whole group of Steeler fans out there that were not even alive or cognizant enough in 2003 to live through that season. That was 6-10 with Tommy Maddox, the quarterback that got them, I think, the 11th overall pick, which turned into Ben Roethlisberger, and the rest is history. So they had to suck, and they had to get really lucky in that draft, mind you, to even get Roethlisberger. But someone you mentioned, and I was going to bring him up anyway, so let's ask the question now. From your perspective, inside the locker room, talking to players, going to press conferences, you've been around this man for a long time. As you said, you've covered the team since 2014. Do you believe that Mike Tomlin is still the best man for the job?
That's a loaded question in this city right now, as you know as well as anybody.
Yeah.
You have to look at a perspective. Like, I don't think he deserves to get fired, but you have to look. Sports world versus normal world is different. Like teams move on. Of course, people talk about the Eagles and how they move on from, Super Bowl winning coaches and win another Super Bowl. They've done it twice now, and they almost fired the coach that won it this year. So I do believe. Now, is this a good enough reason? I do think, I know the Rooney family takes, in the ownership organization takes pride in their, having three coaches since 1969. All three of them won a Super Bowl, and that's part of their brand. Part of, and I think there is value in that. I think that you kind of stick, who you are. Do I think that they would be turning into a new regime, give them a shot in the arm, organizationally? I do think there's value in that too. I think that, and probably 90% of organizations would have done it by now, one way or another. But it's almost funny to bring up anymore. Like, here, I'll give you this. I like to say my dream season for the Steelers, from a perspective of doing my job, is they go 8-9, slide into that 7th seed, and somehow pull an upset in the first round. So all the people that talk about the winning season streak can shut up, and all the people who talk about the no playoff wins since 2016 can shut up, and everybody's happy. It's like, okay, now we can just, like, everybody's all right. We're cool. We're not going to bring because I feel like it just brought up over and over again to the point where it's become a negative that Mike Tomlin hasn't had a losing season, but it's still a good thing, right? It's still an attribute. It's still you're admirable that he's pulled that off. I think that says something, and it says they're competitive. So so that's a long wind. I guess it was me. I'm okay more so than most with the status quo, and in terms of the personal, he definitely has, he has a presence, as you might expect. It's no different than on TV or whatever. But everybody watch Hard Knocks and that, and just, the players certainly respect him. I don't think it's anything like that. We can pinpoint his decisions and his end game, and maybe letting George Pickens run wild or whatever. And those are all valid, good criticisms. But in terms of just seeing him, they're certainly not. It's not as if George Pickens doesn't have any respect for Mike Tomlin, right? George Pickens is just who he is, and any other the players certainly do respect him, and he has a command. And and we can pick about his assistants. There's a lot of things he doesn't do that well compared to the best coaches, but I don't think it's a situation at all where he's lost the locker room or there's a staleness in that because of him or anything like that. If that was a long way to go without really committing, but if that answers your question.
You convinced me of the 8-9 record sneaking in as the 7th seed and winning it. That would be like, you're just checking all these boxes. Like, okay, narrative done. Yes. We're eliminating it. I love it. I'm with you. Let me ask you a question. And again, speak to this because you're in the facility, and your thoughts. This is just your thoughts, unless you want to speak to knowing. How much pull does Mike Tomlin have? Because there's some fans out there that think that Mike Tomlin is a Bill Belichick type when Belichick was the GM and the coach. And the Steelers don't do it that way. Omar Khan, Andy Weidel, they're doing their job. You go to Sheldon White and all those different pro scout directors, all that stuff. And then, Art Rooney II. In your opinion, how much of this team is Tomlin's? Because you get a different story from everyone that you listen to. Some people say that, hey, he has a lot of say. And some people say, look, he's just the coach. He has 1/3 of, let's say, if you're looking at the coach, GM, owner, he is his third. What's your take on that?
Well, there's a couple like facts that I think are verifiable facts. That one thing is, Mike Tomlin is more as a head coach, and certainly as a head coach, doesn't have the formal title as general manager, which there aren't many of those left really anymore. But he is the most hands-on in terms of the draft, in terms of the pro days, in terms of the, all the scouting. He might enjoy that as much as he enjoys it. And this man loves coaching. Don't get me wrong. But I think I'm sure there's head coaches, without, going through or whatever and knowing personally, but that there's like, I don't want to deal with the scouting. I don't want to deal with, yes, I want to know who I'm getting. I want to positionally, I want to listen to my scouts. Probably they're involved that sense. Like, hey, you tell me this guy, we need a receiver. Who's our best, whatever it is. And give me attributes of these guys. Mike likes to go himself and see them. Everybody sees it on these pro days and the Senior Bowl, whatever it might be. And how often is he referenced? He references it, and that's how every week. And again, you watch the press or listen to press conferences. He says, he'll go through his spiel about the opponent and say, I remember the interview we had with him or his pro day. He remembers that stuff. He keeps the Rolodex in his head. He likes to get to know these guys, so he is as hands-on as it now. So that's a fact. Whether or not that means he has the final decision or whatever it is, he's more involved. Not because of his power per se, but just because he enjoys being involved and is involved as much as any coach for sure. Now, he obviously, I'm sure he makes more money than Omar Khan. He's been with, he hasn't been with the Steelers. That's not accurate, but he's certainly higher profile than Omar Khan. He certainly is a more, alpha personality or however you want to put it than Omar Khan is. But I also think I do know Andy Weidel, he kind of commanded instant respect. People do listen to him. He has a respect. People respect his opinion and his professional, what he's done. So he has words. So I'm not sure. I do think it is a collaborative for sure. But I like put this way. I think if Mike goes and interviews somebody and doesn't like him, I'm sure he has pizza. Like I don't think that Omar, who to a point has the final say, formally would if Mike's like, I don't like this kid, I don't want this kid in my team, I don't like him, I'm sure he wouldn't do that. So I believe them when they say there is a collaborative to it, but just by the nature of what we know that Mike Tomlin is involved as much or as any coach in the league for sure in terms of the process, for sure.
He does love it. How many times have we heard that he spoke to Landon Roberts and his dad after the Houston Pro Day?
This is 12 years ago or whatever, right? It is kind of remarkable, and it is, and he's open about that too. That he uses that information.
Yeah.
Whatever. That amazes me about coaches, and they're making a lot of money and then put a lot of time into it. That even when he was facing Landon Roberts all those years, or whoever, player X that he met in 2017, right? And they're facing.
Yeah.
Week 7 against the Chargers. Now I got to remember that the end. Like I'll remember him. Whatever it is. Maybe that's a little edge that helps you in the game plan. Who knows?
We'll see. Okay, a tough question for you here because you mentioned earlier about like the holes in the roster that need to be addressed at some point, whether it's in the draft, whether it's in free agency, or maybe whether it's via trade, which we saw a lot of that happen last offseason. Outside of the roster, if you could pinpoint specific issues that are holding this team back, what would those issues be? Could be offense, defense, doesn't matter.
Well, you look at, I think it's pretty obvious that there was this ties into, I guess the lack of dynamicism to a point ties into the roster construction, everything and the talent. And, there was obviously a decision on their, and I think Arthur Smith is a bright man and he's a good guy. But there's certainly I don't know what, sometimes you watch some other teams and in terms of their creativity, in terms of their the offense and things they do, in terms of their even explosiveness, as it relates to scheme and not just the players and whether you have those type of players. I think there's something missing there, right? I don't, you kind of the Bengals game aside, and so some of the Russ big plays aside, when he was quarterback. In the second half of the season there, some of those long passes aside, you just feel like there's a general kind of malaise, and use that word again, with the offense a lot of times. And some of that relates to personnel. You had an offensive line you didn't really trust. Yourself and quarterbacks, and just really a dearth of weaponry after George Pickens. That's part of the problem, but I think that is there too. And defensively, whatever happened those last, and I'm still trying to hash it out and figure out who's to blame. But again, going back to the defense, the run defense, I think was one thing, was just sort of they were out, physical or out just talented or whatever you want to say. But some of those lack of communication, some of those mistakes, those tight ends going wide open, and just sort of the open sort of what is the word Mike Tomlin used too to describe it? The angst. I was tip my tongue. He said something about they care because they're ornery because they care, or they bicker because they care. Bicker. I think that was it.
There you go.
There was that open kind of bickering there, and there was definitely something wrong there that I don't know ever got resolved. And I don't know if the offseason will resolve. And I think that will be a storyline, at least I'm going to try to look into once we get to the spring workouts, and what the heck happened to you guys. Maybe after 3 or 4 months to be more willing to talk about it, and maybe see how they're addressing that solution, because that was, like I said, the defense those last few games was almost in the borderline, almost embarrassing, especially with some of those plays they were allowing. And it seemed like they didn't really have answers as to why.
Yeah. Well, I know that doesn't give a lot of positivity for the listeners, but let me ask you this question before I let you go. So Mike Tomlin loves to talk about arrows. His arrow is pointing up, all this stuff. If you were to say right now, when as we sit and record this, the Steelers only have Skylar Thompson on a future/reserve contract as their quarterback. We know that they have a lot of salary cap money to spend, and we know they have almost a full allotment of draft picks. Where do you have the Steelers' arrow right now at this juncture in the offseason? Up, down, or is it stagnant, just straight across?
I try to resist being, because I feel like there's a lot of negativity around right now.
There is.
Yes. And I feel like, man, they won 10 games, and I get they lost their last 5, and they made the playoffs the last 2 years. So I certainly recognize and understand all that, and I'm not downplaying it, but I try to err on the side of optimism, or at least the err side of like, hey, it's not as bad as people are saying it is. But when you frame it that way, and I just look at kind of the roster, and I look at, their best players are some of their oldest players, and the fact that some of these earlier or these recent high draft picks, what do we have in Broderick Jones, right? Does anybody know?
Yeah.
And maybe he'll be a great NFL left tackle. I don't know. I certainly not going to say for sure he is. I mean, Zach, for a lot of Keanu Benton at this point last year, I would have said like he's going to be a star, and I don't know anymore. He might just be in body. He might just be a guy who starts in the D line.
Right.
So you combine some of those, even Joey Porter Jr. Last year at this point, I would have said was a star, and I don't think he's going to be a starter. I don't know if he's going to be a star though anymore. So you combine the fact that their best players are aging, and their best young players you're not totally convinced on are going to be superstars, or at least what we maybe thought of. It's really hard for me to say the arrow is up. So I guess if you pin me down, I'd have to say the arrow is down right now.
Oh, okay.
So I'm sorry. Maybe I'll go even, but yeah, if I had to go one way, that's what I got to say. I don't mean to be negativity, but
it's honest. It's honest. And as we sit here right now, like I said, you can't, it's tough to judge what 2025 is going to hold when you don't have a quarterback, when you haven't gotten 3 free agent signings. They could sign a quarterback, whoever it is. They could go out and spend some money on good players like a Deshaun Elliott that comes in and makes an immediate impact. And now all of a sudden we're looking back and saying, man, it was down at that time, but it really has, the arrow is pointing up. So we'll see. We'll wait and see. But I do appreciate your time, Chris. I want to give you an opportunity to plug what you do for Trib Live, as well as social media handles, all that good stuff. Go ahead and do that now.
We branded a Trib Live now, and I guess we've always had as the website triblive.com. So get all your Pittsburgh news actually, and sports. Joe Rudder, the great co-worker for the Steelers, and then we got Kevin Gorman filled in this past year doing the Steelers, and he does the Pirates and whatever else. The Trib Live, and then my X handle I guess is C_Adamski Trib, and check out my musings and what did you call me? I dragged.
Oh, you're the gut punch tweets. You're like, oh, it's not that bad, and then you look at Chris Adamski's tweets, you're like, gosh darn it, it's horrible. The
Maybe I should put
numbers
that in my
don't lie.
bio now.
You can't rebut the tweets that have nothing but statistical numbers, and you're like, ugh, they suck again. But yeah,
Yeah, I mean the playoff stuff is really. I mean it's almost uncanny at this point. That's kind of that's where you're referring to a lot there.
yes,
It's just like it's one thing to not win a play. It's just they haven't been competitive in a playoff game for 8 years now. So, but that's a whole other thing.
Yeah. Well, thanks for the reminder about that, Chris. We do appreciate it. But no, seriously, thank you for your time, man. I'm going to have you on again. I'll start planning it now, and we'll get it done in 3 months before the season starts. So,
there you go.
all right, take it easy, Chris. Thank you very much.
Sure, anytime. Take care.